I once again went down the Big Finish rabbit hole because we've got a new release this past week, and that's Doctor Who, Mind of the Hodiak. And what is this? Written by Russell T Davies and Scott Hancock. Let's explain the story. Let's take it a couple of steps back. So in late 2020, you may remember that there were a series of Doctor Who lockdown tweet-alongs, view-alongs, where people would unite across the world and watch an old Doctor Who story, a revival episode of Doctor Who, I should say. And in late 2020, we were watching The Runaway Bride using the hashtag Santa's a Robot. And because of that, Rusty Davis went through his old boxes, his old folders to try and find material, because Emily Cook, who was an editor at Doctor Who magazine, has since moved on to becoming a producer at Big Finish. This is one of her first projects at Big Finish as well. She would get Stephen Moffat involved, and Catherine Tate, and David Tennant, and Graham Harper, and many other people involved in those watch-alongs, in those viewings. So Rusty Davis was looking at old boxes, and he stumbles across a very old script that he typed out properly in the 1980s on a typewriter when he was in his early to mid-20s, when the Sixth Doctor, played by Colin Baker, and Melanie Bush, played by Bonnie Langford, were the incumbent Doctor and companions. This must have been 1986 roughly. And he wrote part one, a 45-page part one of this story called Mind of the Hodiak, and also wrote a further 8 pages of what would have been part 2, although he never finished it. Apparently, he did submit some scripts to the Doctor Who production office back in the day, because that was something, believe it or not, that you could have just done back in the day. And Andrew Cartmel, bless him, the script editor at the time during the late 1980s for the Sylvester McCoy era, did respond to Rusty Davis and said, we could have a meeting, but then the show was taken off the air, so of course nothing came from that. But yeah, so Russell T Davis found this part 1, he jokingly tweeted, "Oh, Big Finish, you should get in touch." However, he forgot that Big Finish will grab anything that they can, and they did in fact get in touch with Emily Cook producing and helping to organise this coming together. And now, around 14-ish months later, 15-ish months later, we've got Doctor Who, Mind of the Hodiak. So, this is a Sixth Doctor story. In the depths of space, the mysterious Hodiak is manipulating the Galactic Stock Exchange to raise money. His aim, ? To hire mercenaries for a deadly quest across the stars. Meanwhile, on Earth, an ordinary British family is plagued by a series of psychic events. The one thing connecting these events is a magnificent patchwork coat, which just so happens to belong to the Doctor. Mick Ron says, so basically this is Rusty Davis' fanfiction come to life. That's awesome. It is conceptually, and it's a really cool story. It's a really cool narrative of the making of. Rusty Davis, he did a couple of projects for Lockdown. He found this old one from the mid-1980s that Big Finish have picked up, and then, oh lo and behold, he also happens to revisit the showrunner position later on this year, when, with Bad Wolf, and they're now gearing up for production as we speak right now. It's a really cool story. I think that that's the most interesting part of Mind of the Hodiak, because it's not a bad story, it's listenable, but it's really not that good. I don't think that this is an indicative of Rusty Davis's talents as a writer. I don't think that this is going to be an issue with his upcoming relaunch of the series when he returns in Bad Wolf in 2013. But there's a lot of issues that I have with Mind of the Hodiak, and a big one there is the fact that there's so many disparate plot threads that never really thematically come together. Now, there's some elements here that do feel completely like Russell T Davis. It's staunchly anti-capitalist. There's an awful lot of, satire at the stock exchange. There's a great quote in an interview done from Doctor Who magazine a couple of issues ago. He's talking about the stock exchange aspect that the Mind of Hodiak is trying to manipulate. And he says, I was obviously quite obsessed. I don't know why. I've never owned a single stock or share in my life, and I never will. I think this was written around the time they were starting to sell off British Gas and other public properties, which must have been driving me mad. So yeah, he just got mad at some stuff happening in the news in the 1980s and decided to incorporate that into a story, which is pretty cool. And he also has the element of an average family getting swept up in this. You see the family here on the cover as well. There's the grandmother, the mother, and there's also a daughter there as well. They get involved in a weird poltergeist situation. And the middle woman here is played by Tania Miller, who is a favourite actor to possibly play the next Doctor. And she's brilliant in like Haunting of Bly Manor and any other projects that she's in, and in years and years, of course. And you've also got the Sixth Doctor and Mel in there as well. The problem with this is that you've got these disparate plot threads that never really unite thematically. In fact, when it comes to the ending of the story, they only technically work together because all of these characters are now in the same room. They've not actually earned the ending that Mind of the Hodiak is going for. It's a very kitchen sink approach to storytelling, really, where Stock Exchange, Poltergeist, we've got Annette Badland being ridiculously awesome but very religious and a little bit scary. We've got a telepathic creature which manages to veer the TARDIS off course, and the Sixth Doctor just happens to get thrust into this adventure, but maybe it wasn't an accident, and all of this other stuff. We'll play a clip real quick of the Doctor getting thrust into the adventure.
Something's setting coordinates. I've got to look.
Keep down! You don't always have to be the hero, Doctor.
This is my ship, my home. I'll not be threatened on my own ground.
Doctor! It's gone. Whatever it was, it's gone.
But couldn't you feel it? The strength of it? A mind, a magnificent mind. The TARDIS was invaded by the power of thought. But more than that,
It was lonely.
you could feel it too.
Yes. You're right. There was something lost and searching and determined never to give up.
Great comment in the chat, Mr. Dr. Gilmore. I think the concept of sci-fi mixed with the domestic setting was probably more interesting for Doctor Who back in the 1980s. It's a bit played out now. I still think it's a concept with legs, and it's still a concept that can work really, really well. It's not something that Big Finish does very often for their classic Doctor box sets or their collections, so it still works in concept here. The problem is that it's just a domestic family that's not really synchronizing with the A and the B plot. They're the C plot that just so happens to like collide, like that just so happened to collide at the end. And also people asking, how's Tania Miller in it? She's fine, but she's not playing a particularly interesting character. There's not really a lot going on under the hood of these characters here. She's playing Mrs. Maitland, whose mother and also her daughter are taken to this house to do a series of like ghost experiments. They're paid like £50, which is like £100 in today's money, because they need the money, so they do this experiment, and then the Doctor happens to stumble in. This story is 2 one-hour episodes, so they're actually longer than the classic series 45-minute format that Rusty Davies was trying to recreate back in the day. But the problem is that by the time I got to the end of hour 2, like the end of the story, I was consistently waiting for the story to go in an interesting direction, and it never really did. It just kind of meandered, particularly in its first part, where, here's a couple of scenes at the Stock Exchange. Here's a scene with the Doctor and Mel quoting Wind in the Willows, because back in the 1980s, Rusty Davies went to help out at a theatre production of Wind in the Willows. He did graphic design at the time, he designed the poster, so that just happened to be on his mind. So the Sixth Doctor's just quoting Wind in the Willows a lot. And then we have a few scenes with this family who we don't know what's going on with this family at all. And then by the end of part 1, it's like, we need a cliffhanger now, let's just bring up the soundscape and then fix everything in part 2. It felt really encumbered with its own structure. Like there was way too much kind of going on, and not in like a a Revelation of the Dalek sense, where, okay, by the end of part 1, not a lot plot-wise has happened, but it's dripping in atmosphere. You get these great double acts, you get these really great performances in these scenes and these standalone moments. Theo's here now. Alright, Theo? Yeah, it's not like Revelation of the Daleks where you've got all of that working together and then it all pays off in part 2. No, this feels like, I don't know, it was something where I was waiting for it to evolve, I was waiting for it to do something with its themes and its concepts, and it just never really did. The most interesting thing I thought it kind of had going for it personally was the Hodiak, played by Laurie Kynaston, who kind of sounds like a really physically strenuous, like, creature that's struggling to survive in its current form of, like, really powerful telepathy. It's a really good performance, and he's a really cool villain as well. He's a fun theatrical villain. He just doesn't really have an awful lot to do, and the whole stock exchange aspect, that was like, it didn't really amount to anything apart from just getting some tungsten warriors and some metal marching men with laser guns to arrive in the second part of the story for reasons I don't even fully know why they're there, apart from let's just have some acts, apart from just having some action in the second half. Yeah, it felt really, it felt so scattershot. There wasn't really a lot going on there. So what's happened with Mind of the Hodiak is that Rusty Davies, he wrote part 1 and then had like 8 pages of outline for part 2, which Scott Hancock took over and he wrote part 2 and also adapted part 1 a bit to work in the audio format along with Emily Cook. But part 1 is kind of setting up all of these plot threads and not really uniting them. I don't think this is Scott Hancock's fault, and I don't really think that this isn't a really good representation of Rusty Davies' strength as a writer. The themes are there. What we know and what we love about his work is present. It's just not leaping off the page, despite the actor's best efforts. And it's just not gelling into a cohesive theme. Now, I've been called a Big Finish shill in the past because I've not really done many negative reviews of Big Finish stuff. Even some of their weaker stuff I think is interesting, or that has some stuff that's really worth the merit to it, like really worth recommending. They're like a really good, well-oiled machine here. But Mind of the Hodiak really was, I think, one of the weaker Big Finish stories that I've ever listened to. Like, I also think that I understand why Bonnie Langford as Mel is here. That was the original companion and doctor relationship when he wrote the script back in the 80s, but Mel doesn't really have much to contribute here either. She does feel like the stereotypical the companion. She doesn't really feel like she's present in the story other than being someone for the doctor to talk back and forth with. Honestly, I don't think it's very good. Now, some people have said that they enjoy it, and that's absolutely fine. It just didn't really work for me. I just think that there's so much happening that never builds to anything substantial or cohesive. It's a proper kitchen sink approach where we'll throw elements of hard sci-fi, economic commentary and anti-capitalist thought, religion. We'll have Annette Badland in here for a bit, and she's really cool, but she kind of doesn't amount to an awful lot. The Sixth Doctor and Mel, Wind in the Willows, and just hope it comes together at the end. And it never really does. By the end of part 1, which, like I said, is an hour long, it feels like we're just getting to the inciting incident. It feels like we're just getting to, the moments 5 minutes into the first part of a classic Doctor Who story when everything starts going wrong. That's the issue, I think. It's so slow and encumbered with plot threads, and it doesn't have an end goal in sight. And I don't blame Scott for it. If you're given all of these disparate elements that never really work together, then it's an uphill battle to make it lead to something conclusive. It's disappointing. It's one of the weaker Big Finish releases, and and what makes it particularly disappointing is that because this does have Rusty Davies' name on it, this might be a story where people who do not listen to Big Finish will get into Big Finish for the first time on a story that I don't think is very indicative or representative of the output that Big Finish is known for doing. The consistent, clever, thoughtful storytelling. Ishan DW says, how's the extras? Fine. It's like a 15-minute behind-the-scenes thing with Rusty Davies and Emily Cook and talking about the backstory and everything of it. There is actually a really great ending to the behind-the-scenes, a really great, lovely ending to the behind-the-scenes, which I do actually have piled up here as a clip ready. That just shows that this story was made from the heart with the best of intentions, but I don't think it really stuck the landing here.
As ever with Doctor Who, what a joy. Doctor Who just keeps rewarding you. Because look, I wrote that back in 1986 or 1987. It was the first proper script I ever wrote. And then it sits in a box. And now here we are, listening to it with Colin Baker and Bonnie Langford. And what a joy to work with actors of that stature. It's literally a reward. It feels lovely. I'm delighted with it. And it's one of the eternal joys of Doctor Who that Doctor Who isn't the thing that gets snarked about on the internet. Doctor Who isn't about ratings. Doctor Who is about love. It's something we've loved as children. We carry that love into our adult lives, and it stays as love. And I love those actors. I love the whole ideas behind it. I love its ambition. I love its joy. And this production is another act of love, and that is gorgeous.
I'm glad that everyone involved in Mind of the Hodiak had a great time putting it together, and I think the story behind it, finding the lost Russell T Davies script from the 1980s, and it finally made it across the finish line with a really cool cover by Sophie Cowdery, with a really great cast as well, Tania Miller, Colin Baker, Bonnie Langford, Annette Badland, and more. I think that's really cool. I just think it's there's not really anything to it, I think. I think it's quite a disappointing release, to be honest.